So, it's October 2015, and I learned today that there has just been yet another mass school shooting, this time by a 26-year-old man named Chris Harper Mercer. He claimed 10 victims, I believe. 2 died on their way to the hospital, if I remember correctly. I'm really tired of President Obama. His comments on this issue are both naive and illogical, and he really should know better. What he said was, "It is time to change our laws," meaning we need stricter gun control laws. He also said when a flood or hurricane causes devastation and death, we take measures to make our communities safer. Okay, first of all, what new laws do we need? What new laws are going to stop someone from purchasing a gun, or usually multiple guns, and committing mass murder? That if you have a record of violence or crime or mental illness that you cannot purchase a weapon? We have measures like that, and they don't stop these things. These types of mass killings are often carried out by people who have either not much of a record of crime and thus wouldn't be going up against such a barrier, or by people who get hold of guns illegally. Laws aren't going to stop someone who has decided to carry out a murder or murder-suicide from getting a weapon. They will find a way. They've already decided to break laws, so why would more laws be more of a barrier? They may delay them a little longer, but that seems to be about it. Now, I'm an environmental scientist, and I'm confused as to what Obama means by we make our communities safer after a flood or hurricane hits, because he said this. No, we don't. We don't learn very well from natural disasters. After Hurricane Katrina struck the South in 2005, hitting New Orleans the hardest, we just rebuilt in the same location. We do that after every destructive flood, every volcano, hurricane, earthquake. After every disaster, we just rebuild in the same location. When a flood destroys a town, the way to prevent that damage from happening again is to retreat from the floodplain, to rebuild the town away from where the flood waters reached. Against hurricanes, you can designate a land barrier between the source of the storm surge and the flood waters, this usually being coming from the seacoast, and the city. Wetlands, marshes and swamps are very, very effective at absorbing and inhibiting floodwaters, and leaving a region of marshlands in between the ocean and the city will go a long way. Easy solutions? Well, no, of course not. A lot of towns and cities need direct access to the coast, but it is a possible solution, and it can work. Nobody has yet put forth a solution to mass shootings that can work. Stricter gun possession laws won't do it. All they really do is actually prevent any of the good people from having weapons to defend themselves with. I mean, you have the police, yes, but usually by the time they arrive, the bodies are already piling up. And this is not a criticism of the police, of course. Humans can't teleport, they need time to respond, but it doesn't change the fact that the killer is coming to a scene where no one has the ability to defend themselves. This is why schools are such tempting targets. Unarmed civilians and unarmed children, it's a high death count ripe for the taking. I'm actually surprised there hasn't been a massive terrorist attack on a school in the United States yet. I think it could happen at any point. And after the killer is dead, when the wounded are being treated and the dead being buried and remembered, we cry out for the end of guns and gun violence. But guns aren't the only way people kill. In China and Japan, where there are very strict gun regulations, mass killings are done with knives. Elliot Rodger killed his first 3 victims, his roommates, in his residence with knives before moving onto the streets to begin shooting. So making the purchase and ownership of guns illegal is not the answer here. A criminal will either use a different weapon, such as knives, or a vehicle, or they'll obtain firearms illegally on the black market. Or they may already have them in the family. Again, a very critical point. All the gun laws in the world are not going to stop someone who has already decided to commit a violent crime from getting a gun. That will not stop them. And giving ownership of all the guns in the country to the government is in fact very, very dangerous. Who is to say that someday the next shooter won't be someone in the government, someone who has access to massive resources of weapons because we let them? We've all seen examples where the government does what it wants, regardless of what the people say or want, regardless of what the people propose or disagree with. When the government has all the guns, the people are powerless. This is something the authors of the United States Constitution knew very well. They had just fought a war against a government that was enforcing their will upon the people, taxing them without representation. When the Constitution was written, it was written with the mindset that allowing the common population to bear arms, to form a militia, was a way of giving them some power to prevent the government from becoming too powerful and tyrannical over them, and that it was even the responsibility of the people too, should the government go too far, to overthrow that government and put an end to its tyranny. This is what the Second Amendment is really about, folks. This is the motivation behind the right to bear arms. It is not so a few nut jobs here and there can go on shooting sprees when they decide they want vengeance on the world, or so that gun-toting hillbillies can shoot off in the woods, which, if that's the image that people around the world have of America, I'm finding it hard to blame them, because for at least a generation or so, probably longer, that's what a lot of Americans say Americans are. The right to bear arms comes from the motivation of being able to defend your home and your family should the need ever arise. I have heard stories of criminals invading a home, binding and gagging the father while they rape his wife and children, and then kill them or burn the house down with them still alive inside. It's horrific, and without weapons of your own, you are in almost no position to do a thing about it. It's rare, but it does happen. If someone enters your home and threatens your family, you are and should be allowed to use deadly force to defend your family. As for myself, I wouldn't trust that invaders are coming just to rob and ransack and will leave my family unmolested if I don't resist. There's no way I can trust that. I would fight, and I would fight fiercely right away. Unless you have a situation where the perpetrator is on a suicide mission and doesn't care about their fate, then perhaps the strongest possible deterrent to violence is to make it equally or even more dangerous for the criminal to threaten the victim. That meaning, give the average person a way to defend themselves and have them willing to do so when such a situation arises. And when you do have a nut job on a murder-suicide rage, having someone around with access to and who will use deadly force against them will put an end to the killing. And let's talk about this nut job aspect. After each of these school shootings has taken place, it is always said that the killer was mentally ill, that they were crazy and needed better mental health care. Now, it is true that the mental health care in this country sucks. In fact, many forms of our health care are failing the very people they say they're meant to help. It's definitely true that health care needs reform on a massive scale. But what if these mass murders are not crazy people? What if they are people who simply believe that they've been pushed to a point, whatever factors or events in their lives led up to it, where they believe that death and taking a mass of people along with them is a better fate than choosing to live? People with the intellect and sanity enough to hide their emotional state from their parents, their teachers, their family, and therapists, and then lash out in deadly surprise that no one saw when or from exactly who was coming. Now, I'm not making excuses for these guys. These school shooters are deluded about whatever message they think they're sending. They are pathetic and they are horrible people. I also don't like guns, okay? I'm not advocating for people being able to buy and own guns because I like having guns around. I don't. But we have to try and be more realistic than we've been so far. We are not doing a good job of figuring out who is likely or unlikely to be the next murderer. Whatever scale of crazy or illness you believe in, our society does not know how to identify and help its people. We don't help these people in need. And I have personal experience with how poor the healthcare system is. I was born with a genetic defect that, from the time I was an infant, was slowly damaging my organs. I was always physically ill as a young child. I was small, I was jaundiced, I was weak. I had maybe 1/20th the endurance of most children my age. It was frustrating and humiliating to me, and I had to be brought to a hospital frequently for tests and stays in the hospital that, honestly, to me, felt like being treated like a medical toy. I spent my infancy, childhood, and adolescence like this, in the years that were absolutely crucial to my developing identity. So that identity developed as a belief that I only existed to be poked, prodded, and abused by doctors and nurses, and I hated them. In all that time, not once did any one of them ever ask me about how I was experiencing all that, what my feelings were. It was always, well, you just have to do it. And that has had lifelong consequences. Stress, trauma, and struggles in identity that no one in the medical or mental health care system ever saw coming, because they never brought it up with me or my family. The doctors even said to my parents, if we just fix the physiology, his medical numbers and levels, he'll be fine. There'll be no psychological damage. They said this, naively and arrogantly. What does that tell you about the competence of our healthcare system? The only part of my identity that developed as a way to keep me sane was my love of science and my fascination of dinosaurs. I held on to that. And I am still, now at age 30, struggling to identify myself as the scientist I want to be and not as a medical experiment. My parents have struggled very hard to help me with this too, but they weren't given any advice or guidance on how to do this as I was growing up. So it's been very painful for all of us. I could have become the next mass shooter. I could have said, I'm tired of being tortured by all these doctors and nurses with no regard as to how I experience their treatments. It's not worth it anymore. I'm going to take them and myself out. At least it'll all be over. It would have been very easy to do that. And I'm actually very much surprised that a story like that hasn't come out yet, that someone who has grown up ill since birth feels pushed to so far a point that they shoot up a hospital. I'm surprised that has not yet happened, and I believe that one day it will. Now, it will not be me. I promise you that. It will not be me, but it will happen. I am motivated to stay on this earth, to live and let live, and to do what I can with my knowledge in science and natural history to help it recover and rebuild from damage instead of causing more damage. But it's not easy. We want to heal the damage in this world, but we can't do that by being naive. We do need change, but we need to spend time to determine what change we really need, the right type of change, to find real solutions. Obama says he's going to keep bringing up this issue every time another mass shooting takes place, yet he is not bringing any real solutions to the table. He talks, and he expands government, but that's exactly what the authors of the American Constitution were trying to guard against.